If there was one idea relentlessly bashed, hammered, drilled, lit up in figurative neon, and brandished into the viewer's metaphorical hide by the film Barbie, it was that societal progress is still frustratingly hampered by the patriarchy. Women, so that film expressed, are overlooked and held back from realizing their potential by latent bigotry in academia, in Hollywood, and in business, and have to contend with harassment and misogyny and double standards. Perhaps you are a seething misogynist who hates to see women succeed. Perhaps you're a progressive ally of feminism. Maybe you're a young Gen Z swiper and scroller whose soul has been constructed by social media. Whatever your perspective, you'd have to agree that at least some of that so-called patriarchal power structure is very much in evidence. The briefest look at the higher echelons of power in the corporate, political, and entertainment worlds will tell you that. But that isn't the complete story, and I'm going to try to explain what I think a lot of people feel latently, but aren't able to articulate or pass and divide up into categories in their mind, and that is, while men still dominate much of the literal forms of authority and power, to a great extent the power of our cultural messaging and cultural narratives as a society is held by women. From the marketing we see on television, to the public relations of companies, to the humanities departments that develop cultural theory, to the journalism on social issues we consume, to the shows we watch, all of these aspects of modern life, the social messaging and narratives we receive, are overwhelmingly influenced by and projected into the public consciousness by women, or, to be more specific, progressively minded white women. You're no doubt familiar with the grievances about Hollywood, and in general, you're likely quite sympathetic to them. After all, it is statistically true that the highest positions are occupied by, and the biggest paychecks go to men. But in order to tell the two stories that are going on here, we need to break the numbers down. According to the Writers Guild of America's own internal review of the industry from last year, it is true that men make up the largest share of TV employment. But in terms of the social narratives we receive as a society, the actual storytelling and backgrounds and genders of on-screen characters and narrative choices, the majority of staff writers, story editors, and executive story editors are women. At the front end, the execs and studio heads will set the agenda and lay out the broad contours of projects. At the back end, the roles higher up the chain, held more by men and earning more money, are almost entirely production roles. Which means, while they still might weigh in on creative or casting choices, the fundamentals of their roles are organizational, promotional, financial, and managerial. They, by and large, are more concerned with the wider development and shifting of the product. So, while the staff writers don't have much influence or power or income in their workplace, they nonetheless have, and often lean heavily in their writing into their preferences for cultural messaging, crafting, and influence. This is the duality that might have been confusing you, and I don't blame you. There is underrepresentation of women in Hollywood by what might be called the patriarchy, and simultaneously a huge amount of Hollywood streaming product that seems disproportionately skewed towards feminist self-inserts, benign male characterization, diversity and inclusivity jammed incongruously into unsuitable contexts, gender-swapped remakes of beloved classics, jarringly self-indulgent warrior princess characters, and all the other tropes of modern entertainment. In geopolitics, there are two terms for how powerful countries exert their power. Hard power, military and economic leverage, and soft power, which is the cultural, technological, and image-based way they project themselves and influence the world. In Hollywood, think of the so-called patriarchy as the hard power, the magnates at the top deciding on the mergers and the tax write-offs and making the megabucks, and the increasingly female-dominated soft power, the actual projection of cultural messaging and social ideas and beliefs through writing and script editing. Let's expand this idea outward and look at cultural messaging, social ideas, and narratives in most spheres of life. In discussions about college, much of the discourse is centered around the lack of women in the STEM fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The issue here is partly financial. Careers in STEM subjects tend to be more remunerative than other disciplines. There are actually good reasons for this. The main one being that if you don't design an inner-city bridge properly, it will collapse and dozens of motorists will die in a mass of concrete and dust. If you're designing a component for a jetliner, it had better work, otherwise all 300 passengers and crew will plummet to a fiery death on the side of a mountain. Therefore, it's not unreasonable that such careers are quite scalable in terms of income. But the other issue here, again, is how our cultural understanding and cultural narratives as a society are defined. Women are overwhelmingly overrepresented in the humanities, and it is from the humanities, sociology, linguistics, cultural theory, gender studies, women's studies, post-structuralism, intersectionalism, queer studies, etc., that progressive ideas originate and are promulgated out into liberal think tanks, then into society, which then develops into policy. Then there's turning on the TV or waiting to skip an ad on YouTube. The vast majority of graduates of marketing degrees are women, and 60% of all marketing professionals. This encompasses print media, online, and TV. This means, while there's plenty of ads for testosterone supplements and the like that are brazenly macho, on balance, marketing is likely to be tinged, at least at subtle levels, by the perspectives of generally self-identifying progressive-leaning women, which may partially account for the astounding amount of dopey, sexless husbands in ads, the man-child clumsy caricatures, the empowered depictions of women who comport themselves graciously, often with a droll but tolerant eye roll at their compromised or overweight or benign husbands or partners. Related to this is public relations. A study conducted by NYU in partnership with PR Week suggested that PR professionals' political and social beliefs are out of sync with the general public, leading to poor client counsel. Those political and social beliefs are, of course, progressive, and the majority of PR professionals are women. In the sphere of journalism, the genders are more or less evenly divided. But again, we have to drill down a little to get a sense of how the wider social and cultural narratives are steered. Men overwhelmingly represent the majority of journalists covering crime and sport, for example. Women overwhelmingly cover social issues. Which has the most cultural and social influence on shaping or emphasizing perspectives? From entertainment show writing, to journalistic interpretation and dissemination of social issues and change, to the marketing we see on television, to the public relations of companies, to the humanities departments that develop cultural theory. All of these aspects of modern life, the social narratives we receive, are overwhelmingly influenced by and projected into the public consciousness by women. The so-called patriarchy is about the organization and allowance of power and influence in society, which is still deeply frustrating for women, and I appreciate that all of this may be quite abstract to women who endure slights and snubs and are trying to earn a living. But this patriarchal structure is in a parallel relation to a somewhat more feminine-orientated structure of expressions and representations of cultural messaging and cultural narratives as a society. The thing is, much of this modern feminism that has made its way onto the screen is quite cynical. From the heavy-drinking, singleton aimlessness of She-Hulk, to the crass, identity-riven nonsense of Velma, to the posturing sexlessness of Galadriel, to the overpowered Mary Sue sexlessness of Rey Skywalker, to the obnoxious amount of screen time of a more or less co-lead in Indiana Jones, to the imposition of gender swaps or refocused characterization in classic properties, to the warping of source material like The Witcher to partially reorientate the story around two female characters, to presumptively altering beloved classics with a so-called revisionist eye to correcting dated ideas, and on and on. So this is why it feels like awkward territory to criticize something like Barbie for pushing its message a little too hard. We all want everyone to succeed and realize their potential. But let's just acknowledge there is more than one form of power and influence in how society defines itself, holds itself to account, and sends messages back at itself. Surely the one thing we all ultimately want, in all forms of power and influence, is balance.